Welcome to Floyd Street's Finest. He is Holy Cross head coach, former Louisville assistant Mark Lieberman. I am Jack Grossman. Thanks for tuning in. Like, subscribe, all that stuff on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you are consuming this content. I'm at Jack Grossman 97 on Twitter. He's at Coach Lieberman, also on Blue Sky 2 at Jack Grossman. Coach, we got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, and you're 2 for 2. You remember
I'm
the
two for
intros again.
two.
I love it, Jack.
It's good. I got it. I got it on the top of my show sheet. Like, actually remembered to do that. So as long as I read that, I should be good. I don't believe myself all the time, but but Coach, hope you had a happy Thanksgiving. I know you guys took Fern Creek down to double overtime a couple days ago. But how have you been?
I've been great, other than the fact it's about 15 degrees outside and I'm dressed like I'm in Antarctica.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm good. I'm good. How was your Thanksgiving?
Oh, fantastic. Absolutely loved it. The stuffing, the green bean casserole, the potatoes, the turkey, all of it. Had about 20 people at my parents' house. Great time. But I was disappointed when I got back to Atlanta Wednesday morning and it was 25 degrees here as well.
Really?
So yeah, it's a little bit warmer now, but I got on the tarmac and I was like, this wasn't what I was expecting. I thought I was getting away from it. Come on.
I lived there for a few years and it's sneaky cold down there. So
Every
on
once
a
in a while.
little side note, got to meet you and your father came by practice, which was great. Got a chance to meet him. So that was a pleasure. So great
Oh
guy.
yeah, we absolutely loved it, Coach. It was awesome. Yeah, got to see you, Rubbage and everyone in action. It was great. I think the most jaw-dropping thing is when you had everyone do push-ups during the film session
Yeah.
when
Well,
when someone didn't know what was
yes.
going on.
If someone didn't have their
Yeah,
folder ready to go, that's the way it goes.
yeah,
So
I believe it. I believe it. It was a lot of fun. Really, I really appreciate it. We'll definitely be doing that the next time in town.
great.
So you got to get to a game next time, also, for
Definitely.
sure, for sure. But Louisville had so much momentum after the Bahamas. And, the injury bug is going to play a key role with this. With case in prior, Corn Johnson announced out for the year, still missing Traore as well. But U of L lost basically all of that momentum, came to a screeching halt against Ole Miss on Tuesday night. And Coach, I want to start with this because one, I was at the game, and the game was terrible to be completely honest. But still great to be the upsetter, seeing people hanging out, get to see the atmosphere. But I noticed this in the crowd and on Twitter the past couple weeks, social media, all that stuff. Just coming from a lot of different sources now when I listen to the radio a little bit as well. People are mad at the fact that Louisville keeps chucking threes, even though they definitely were not shooting the ball well on Tuesday night. They finished let me see here, 5 of 30. That's not good
Mm-hmm.
numbers. 17%, never good. Louisville's now shooting 27% on the season. That's 338th nationally, but they're getting 40.2% of their points from three. That's a 22nd highest in the country. But we see this fatigue already starting to set in of like, why are they shooting so many three-pointers when this is how Pat Kelsey wants to play? We do this coming in. They're going to play fast. They're going to play up tempo. They're going to shoot a lot of threes. And they got a roster that was supposed to be compatible for it. So I want to ask you this, Coach. At what point should we officially be worried about Louisville's three-point shooting? Because start of the year, they weren't hitting a lot of shots. It's like, okay, they got a lot of shooters. It's water will eventually find its level. But we're sitting here on December 5th and we're recording this podcast. We're about a month into the season. I'm still believing that the shooting numbers are going to go up, but at what point are what the numbers say you are and not what everyone perceived you to be coming into the season?
First, it's a humbling game, and so you get back from the Bahamas, you play so well, expectations are through the roof, and then all of a sudden you lay the egg against Ole Miss. As far as the shooting is concerned, that you said it, Jack. You brought in a roster designed to space the floor, run a lot of actions where you get some stretch players. All your bigs are stretch players who can knock down shots, and that's what the expectations were. And if you watch them even in the Bahamas in the preseason and you watch them shoot the basketball, I mean, their first set of the game is a roll and replace where Case Pryor hits a three. And I've been to a couple of practices and these aren't guys that are just throwing up bricks and that you're saying, well, there's a reason you're open. It's because you can't shoot. These guys are capable shooters. They're guys that make shots. To say that you're all of a sudden going to become a blocker mover offense or run flex and change into something that you're not, you could tweak some things, but when you lose some of those players, a guy like Traore, who's just a offensive rebounder, and again, some of the offensive rebounds and sometimes the best shots you get are off second or third shots because you're scattering and defenses aren't recovering. If you look at some of the numbers and you watch these games, some of these shots are hurried from the fact of they are getting a little sensitive because they're down, and all of a sudden it is, all right, we're going to force a shot. And it's not always the shot that other players are expecting, or it's off of one or two passes. Where in the Bahamas, you had Chucky Hepburn just being able to create and get in lanes and just get dump offs or score for himself or create opportunities for others. So really, I don't think the philosophy is going to change, Jack. It's not like they're going to go in there and say, well, the fans are clamoring for us to now run a completely different offense and we have to change what we're doing. Also, you have to understand your personnel. He recruited guys that are stretching the floor and going to knock down shots. I think it's, yes, the numbers aren't great, but we're still not in the point where we've delved into ACC play and those numbers are still the same. So I think there's ways to tweak it where you've just got different ways to run stuff, different actions, but I still don't think you're going to see a team that's going to change their philosophy.
Right. I think of the classic example of this was Luke Hancock in 2012, 2013 when he came in highly touted as a shooter, was transferred in from George Mason, sat
Mm-hmm.
out the first year that he comes in, and he struggled mightily from three the first couple months of the season. And I remember fans not being thrilled about that. But when it mattered most, he came on, and it takes is seeing a couple shots for these guys come. It's almost team wide though. It's really, I look at three dudes specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Because Rain Smith's shooting 39% from three. He struggled the last couple games, but that's a small sample size. So like you feel good about the 39% there. That matches his career averages. Chucky Hepburn's at 34%. That's a couple ticks above where he was at Wisconsin last year. Here he's shooting the ball pretty well, really confidently. I'm going to leave Pryor off of this because he's not really a factor for the rest of the season, unfortunately, now for Louisville. He obviously had his struggle shooting the three, but provided so much else in other areas for Louisville. But Noah Waterman, just 10 for 41 this season, 18%. Terrence Edwards is 20% this season. Hadley is 31%. Those are three dudes that shot 36% or better last season. Edwards was 36 and 45% the last 2 years. Hadley 41% last year. And Waterman, again, who is just 10 of 41 right now, shot 37% or better in 4 of his previous 5 college basketball seasons. Those three dudes, if just Water can find their level and they have positive regression there over the next month plus or so, that can completely change what Louisville looks like offensively and as a team shooting the three ball, especially when you consider without Pryor now, those are the three dudes that I think are going to step up and have to play more of that role that he was having to play.
So during my entire career of coaching, from Ryan Burkhart at Southeastern Louisiana, who just came to the top of my mind right now, to players at Monsignor Place like Jose Solorzano, which means nothing to the people listening right now, but shout out to Jose, who one of the best shooters I ever had in high school and wasn't making shots all the way up to Christmas. Great looks. And all of a sudden, he's disappointed and he gets in the gym and he works on it. But these guys, it's not like Coach Kelsey's telling these guys, shoot or shoot. Get in the gym and get some more reps in, but we trust you. We believe in you. He's not saying take less shots. That's the last thing you want to say to these guys. So for fans out there to understand, it's the complete opposite. It's like, no, keep shooting. No, you're going to make the next one and believe it. And that's what happens. It's one of those things, especially with shooters. You are never going to take away their confidence and think that they have to question their shooting or question their shot selection at times. It's what you do, and that's what he brought in here. I really believe, and I use that phrase all the time, the water level's off. All that splashing around, it's gonna balance out. And I think you have guys, you're not talking about guys who aren't shooters. You're talking about guys who consistently, even just looking at them from a mechanic standpoint, these guys can shoot the basketball. They're not going to change that. They're just going to, I think the biggest thing is they can create more opportunities off of second shots, third shots, or defensively, which is where I think they really struggled against
Yeah,
Ole
I
Miss.
agree.
And that's the thing that people are not talking about as much. It's more of the shooting, but there were so many lapses on the defensive end. And then you want your offense to help your defense as well, where you're getting when you start making shots, you can get set and so on when you're not sensitive, like I've always talked about.
Yeah, and let's transition to the defense, Alex. I wanted to address the shooting because that was the big topic in the room, both in the arena and just everyone talking about it, getting angry about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought generally Louisville, until as you said, they kind of just started rushing shots when they got down big in the second half. I thought Louisville generally got good shots, and at
I do
some
too.
point you got to trust that the guys that you brought in to make those shots are going to eventually start doing that. And if
Mm-hmm.
we're sitting here 6 weeks from now and that never happened, you're probably not a very good basketball team, to be honest. But that's where you got to trust everything that we thought preseason with this basketball team. Louisville, to me, defensively, especially now without Pryor and for the foreseeable future without Traore, where they don't really have much of an interior presence, to be completely honest, on the defensive end. They've been a team that's thrived. I mean, you think the Indiana game, especially, where getting deflections, getting turnovers, getting out in transition. I mean, Louisville, for instance, on the offensive end, shooting over 60% from inside the 3-point arc, which is seventh highest in the country. I think most of that is because of easy layups and dunks and transition off of their defense. Their best offense this year has been getting out in transition from the defense. But when you're playing a team like Ole Miss, and this will apply to Duke on Saturday as well, Ole Miss is the best team in the country right now in taking care of the basketball. Number one in offensive turnover percentage. They don't turn the ball over. Duke, by the way, on Sunday, they're a top 15 team nationally, and they handled Auburn's pressure, who pressures the ball better than anyone last night. Really, really brilliantly. Only had, I think, 5, 6 turnovers in that game. But you only create 8 turnovers against Ole Miss. And what we saw in the Bahamas was the ability to create turnovers and get deflections and getting the passing lanes. That really masked a lot of the other issues Louisville has on the defensive end. And on Tuesday night, it was they couldn't stay in front of Sean Padula, they couldn't stay in front of Dre Davis, and they really struggled one-on-one staying in front of guys. But just if Louisville's not forcing turnovers right now, it doesn't look very pretty on the defensive end.
Well, if you look at an Ole Miss team, and again, you mentioned it, they had 15 blow-bys. Ole Miss did
Yeah, that's
in that
accurate.
game, and then you have 3 back cuts. Hadley's back cut 3 times in the first half because Ole Miss is so good off the ball. So we're talking about the blow-bys and Padula and Murray being able to get where they want. But even with Dre Davis, you watch the actions. Guys don't ball watch. Guys are cutting. Guys are setting hammer screens. There's a lot of actions that Ole Miss runs, and Tennessee did the same thing. You just had a lot of disruption, and that's early in the season. But
Yeah.
when teams are running a lot of actions, it's you really have to be locked in. And in this game, you could see where the slippage on the defensive end really affected what Louisville was trying to do. Now, the other thing is, too, you're putting Chucky Hepburn in a lot of stuff as well. They had him off the ball a lot of times as well because, look, he was pressuring in the Bahamas. He did a great job of pressuring the ball. He came up with some big steals against West Virginia late. So what are teams going to start doing like Ole Miss did? Have other guys bring up the ball. Have even where you're not going to have a Chucky Hepburn pressuring as much. And that kind of dictates where that tempo is and forcing turnovers. And you're taking him away from being where he's so strong, his pickup points and pressuring the ball, and now making him have to run through cross screens and floppies and guys exit screens and whatnot, just running baselines, and where you're going to work on him and tiring him out. And you've even seen teams are going to start doubling him, and what that does, doubling him offensively. And what that does now, that's a factor because look, it's 17-11. They come down the floor and you get a great pass. It's a drip pass by Chucky. Edwards gets it. One more to Rain Smith, who misses it. And now Chucky has to sprint back in transition. No, and he's getting to Padula, and Padula just takes it in for a wide open layup because Chucky has to do all those things defensively, and that affects the effort. Instead of being 17-14, now it's 19-11 because Chucky has to sprint the floor. No one else stops the ball, and Padula gets to the rim, even though Chucky is trying to get there. So those are things now. You don't have a rim protector like Case and Pryor now. So it's going to be a little different things that they're going to have to do defensively. But I think that's the biggest thing. And then when you take Chucky out of his impact on the defensive end, that's a factor as well.
And that's something where you look ahead and who Louisville's playing soon, Duke on Sunday. How did they alleviate the Auburn pressure last night? It was by having Cooper Flag.
Exactly.
Like be your point forward and handle a lot of the ball handling responsibilities to where it's not all the guards that are trying to pressure you.
And
You
who
look
was
at,
really good at that? Case and Pryor. He was
yep.
really good at pressure release and bringing the ball up and
Oh, yeah.
getting him into their dribble handoffs, getting him into their split actions, all the stuff they were doing. He was good at that as well.
And also defensively, he was the guy that you couldn't really, that wouldn't be nearly as effective when he was on the floor defensively
Mm-hmm.
because other than Chucky, he was probably their best defender when it came to pressuring the ball, heating people up, and really making life uncomfortable for whoever had the ball. I mean, how many
See,
times
and
did
that's yeah, and yeah, Jack, like that's such a huge point that you're making because we talk about being unselfish defensively. You can get up in pressure because there's a guy behind you that's going to erase those mistakes. And who's really going to do that now for this Louisville team? There was one time in the second half where they X out of the post, meaning that they're switching and then they're switching men, and then the big has to recover back. And you have a situation where Waterman recovers back, but he's playing behind Davis, and then all of a sudden it's a straight line drive because he can't get around with a foot fight. And if you can't get around, you're very athletic enough to change that shot, and that's just not his game.
Yeah, and I would say, Kentucky in a couple weeks as well. It's another team that'll, play
Mm-hmm.
through Amari Williams, Andrew Carr as well to just try to
Yes,
relieve the guard pressure for sure.
sure,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're gonna
So
people are gonna see what happened against Ole Miss and try and say, okay, how do we neutralize Chucky Hepburn because of how he impacts the game defensively? Well, there's ways you're gonna do it, and you saw what Ole Miss did.
yeah. So what are some things Louisville can do to try to get around those types of things? Because I mean, we saw it to where, like you said, Chucky's out on the ball pressure's not nearly as good. You need other guys to step up and try to fill that void, but you have the injuries as well and all that stuff. What can Louisville try to do to have success if they're not forcing turnovers on the defensive end?
Well, that's the controllables, and that's just effort to me. And I think, look, Coach Kelsey's a fantastic coach. That they have a good system. It's just a matter of those guys really not having slippage and really being locked in. I talked about Hadley being back cut and those switches and the footwork as far as Xing the post and moving around and getting your foot. It really is to say that there's a way that philosophically I get those guys just to absolutely dig in, chart everything, chart their stance, chart their hand placement, chart their heads on a swivel, make sure they're switching out. They're top locking guys because they know in a situation like I talked about early in the season when Rain Smith got caught on a screen, playing on the high side where you're not letting a guy out and those type of things. There's tweaking that needs to be done, but it's really saying, okay, Edwards, Hadley, all the guys, hey man, that's something you can control. So, shots sometimes aren't going to go in, but your effort defensively and making sure that we're digging in, it really is that kind of mindset and having a mindset of not tonight. You're not getting beat off the bounce. We are not getting back cut. We are dodging, defeating every screen that comes out there. We are vicious and violent on the defensive end. That's just kind of mentality they got to have going in because that's what they're going to need. It's going to have to be a collective effort. You're not going to have a guy that's just going to erase mistakes. That means charges, deflections, hand placement, shrinking gaps. All those things is something that they're going to have to do.
Right, because you brought it up just now again, but a little bit earlier as well. Louisville struggled with the back cuts in the Ole Miss game and the Tennessee game. We saw it even in the Bellarmine game, where they really struggled with Bellarmine's off ball
Yeah.
movement, the diagonals, and all
Mm-hmm.
that stuff as well. That's 3 games on tape now where we've seen that. And Duke probably won't burn you too much with that on Sunday, but Kentucky next week, they move a lot without the ball, and they move very well without the ball. Well, as well, that's a consistent thing we're seeing now from this team to where it's like, okay, you got to figure out a way to clean that up, whether it's just effort, scheming, whatever it is. That's officially starting to become a trend here defensively.
Jack, I got something happening here. Can we take a pause and
Yeah.
then get right back to it? Hold on one second.
All right, Coach, let me ask you this. So Louisville has a lot to figure out. I think,
Mm-hmm.
like we talked about offensively, it's, you just got to hit shots, as simple as that. But defensively, how you're trying to clean some of these things up, how you're trying to replace the guys that are injured prior, Johnson and Traore. I do think Traore is a dude that can help with a lot of things defensively when he comes
Hmm.
back. But the problem is that's 5, 6 weeks down the line. And I would argue Louisville is playing their most critical stretch of the regular season right now. When you look at how front loaded the schedule is, all those things we've talked about in the net, which will change. And that's a very important thing that everyone's net rankings will change daily. They are not locked in stone. But as it stands today, Louisville only has 5 more quad one games the rest of the year, or rather 7 quad one games the rest of the year, but 5 of them are between now and January 11th. That's puts a lot of pressure on you to get a lot of your NCAA tournament resume work done in this next 4 or 5 weeks. And I talked about that earlier this week about the sense of urgency. Louisville doesn't have a lot of time to adjust to all the injuries and all that stuff. And you start this stretch laying an egg against Ole Miss. Now you got Duke, probably the most talented team in the country, coming to the center on Sunday. How can Pat Kelsey and his staff try to make some of these adjustments and be able to stay competitive? Because let's be quite honest, if they're going to be an NCAA tournament team, they need to win a couple of these games over the next month plus.
Yeah, you still have the youth of Duke, and we've seen that in spurts. And of course, last night they're down early. I was truly impressed of how they battled back. I mean,
I was too.
you're down 13-2 to a veteran laden, just a physical Auburn team that just gets after it, that runs great stuff. And if you look, they
They
run.
disrupted a lot of that great stuff last
Yeah,
night. Yeah.
they did when they start scoring and those type of things.
Yeah.
But early on, Auburn runs some good sets. Look, Duke is not going to overwhelm you with a sophisticated, and it's not a knock on what they do. Look, it's going to be spacing and attacking, and that's always been Coach K's philosophy anyway. You just got really good players, and you're going to try and create 1-on-2 where now it opens up somebody. Biggest thing is staying in front. It's not going to be an overcomplicated from an offensive system standpoint. So this is a game where you take individual pride to say we're going to keep guys in front, make them get to a third dribble where we can close out and contain. And I think they'll be able to run and get some shots, some good looks. This is a game where, hey, all of a sudden it can alleviate all the concerns if Louisville comes out, because they're going to get good looks against this. Duke is at times, and if you watch it and throughout and watch even in the second half against Kentucky, they're going to overhelp, and there's slippage because you have a lot of young players, a lot of new players. And Duke's philosophy is almost, hey, they don't overhelp. And sometimes, and even Jay Billis made the point last night where there was a slip and no one had seen the ball because there was off the ball action and their backs were turned. So with the stuff that Louisville runs, I think offensively they're going to be just fine. I really do
Interesting.
on Sunday. But defensively is where they're going to have that mindset, whether they're going to double down on Flag and double him early, take the ball out and deny him and do different things and try and make them more left-handed and make them a little uncomfortable with some of the things they do. I think that we'll see some of that. But I really do believe offensively they're going to be okay.
I would say offensively, a lot of it depends on which type of Duke we're getting, because as you said, like early on in the Auburn game, they weren't heating up the ball. They Auburn was able to get in their stuff really easily, and they burned them on that. And then they really killed him, Janai Broom, like 3, 4 times, slipping that high ball screen, getting an easy dunk off that. But when Duke was locked in, and I think that's the big question for Duke, is how many minutes will they be locked in defensively in this game? They are.
Look, with Auburn also had like screen to screen interactions, which is what
Yeah.
Louisville loves to do. I mean, you have Rain Smith set a back screen, and all of a sudden he's receiving another screen. Those are actions. Terrence Edwards, the same thing. Hadley, they're constantly moving, whether it's DHOs, there's false actions. Those are things that are tough to guard. And you have a Duke team that's just going to rely on athleticism at times because of their youth and trying to put that system together.
Yeah.
And they're still not where they need to be. So I think on the offensive end, Louisville's going to be able to attack.
Fair enough. I mean, my only worry would be, how do they handle that athleticism? Do they avoid getting overwhelmed by the athleticism at times? If you can do that, get in some of your stuff and handle the ball pressure well when Duke locks in on that side of the ball, I agree they can get some good looks. Defensively, I'm intrigued to see what they do with Flag, because Auburn switched a lot, and
Yes,
he's shown time and time again, whether it be the Auburn game or a lot of the early games they've played, he can just rise over smaller guys and just get into that mid-range jumper around that elbow area.
Yeah,
And just
you can't leave him. Kentucky at the end of the game just doubles it. But like that
Yeah.
stuff you have to do throughout. You got to scramble out. You've got to make him a passer, and you got to live with that. You just can't leave him on an island. He loves the elbow area. He loves the mid post. I mean, he had a pro move early in that game where he just does a spin move and just it's ridiculous how good he is. So you have to understand that. But at times he is hunting, and that's not in a bad way because he's such a good player. But he's thinking shots. So if there's times you can double him early and make him pass out of necessity, then that's something that will help this team.
Yeah, that's something to where you also can't let other guys get going as well. You
Mm-hmm.
gotta make sure Knipple stays at bay. Duke's guards haven't been great, but Isaiah Evans comes out of nowhere last night. I think it was 6 threes in the first half. And that's gonna be tough as well. Well, as including, how do you think Louisville tries to handle Duke's size in this one?
Yeah, again, I
Yeah.
think there's going to be a lot of that. That's a great question, Jack, because they've shown that they do like to fire or double the post at times. This is a team that you might not want to do that because those guys, with their size, they're not
They can
looking
patch
to
right over the double team.
right. They can pass over it, but they're looking maybe pass first. So if you're doubling it with the shooters that Duke has and the scorers, I don't see them doing much of that. I think they're going to double some of the scorers more than the post and say, okay, we'll leave you on the island. That's going to be back to the basket stuff. And if you're going to just try and bury him and so on, even like with Williams, I don't think he's just such a good defensive player. But I don't think that's something that they're going to be overly committed to stopping them in the low post. I think it's going to be more perimeter oriented. But as we talked about earlier, it's equal opportunity. With Duke, whoever gets that rebound or whoever's, I mean, they're filling, it's almost 5 out sometimes. They're getting down the floor. Their spacing is pretty good. So, and that's where again, Chucky gets neutralized a little bit.
Yeah, and that's where I think I'm less worried about just, them straight posting up Malik or something like that, but more so how does Louisville do their due diligence on the defensive glass where U of L's, around hovering around the 200th range in the country and that with all Duke size to where I wonder even if Louisville's able to get good stops initially, will you be able to clean up the defensive glass and get stops and get out in transition to get some buckets before Duke's defense can get back?
That's the $1 million question. And I know they emphasize it. I know they emphasize gang rebounding, boxing out / car crashing. I know that's emphasized by that team. I've seen it personally. I've seen them at practice, and they're going to do it. And it's going to have to be gang rebounding. It's going to have to be. You're not having somebody. Okay, Case and Pryor just going to clean it up, or Traore is going to go in there and get it. No, it's gang. It's everybody attacking, and it's going to be where balls are tipped and we're just battling for it. No rebounds, no rings. So in a game like this, this is something where yes, one and done for a Duke team. And again, it's not the easiest thing because those long shots, even with Louisville, that's why Louisville does a good job of offensive rebounding.
Yeah,
Because
a
you
lot of
watch
long
teams that,
shots.
yeah, but you watch that for when you watch players, anytime a shot is up, unfortunately, most teams defensively take a step in instead of a step back because of the long shot. It's innate, it's natural. So you have to work on that. And I know Louisville does. So I think if you can rebound the basketball and frustrate Duke on that end a little bit, because they're athletic and good at getting second shots themselves. Those are all factors. But to your point, it's a toughness measuring stick, and it's like we've got to battle, we've got to gang rebound, we've got to just stick our nose in there. There's really, I'm telling you, there's no sort of mathematical equation here to say, okay, I've been part of Rick Pitino's practices, same thing. Get in there and do your job and be physical.
Let me ask you this, because like with Louisville's, Duke, Kentucky, Carolina, Florida State, all Clemson, all these teams coming up, the ACC, and this puts even more pressure on this upcoming stretch for Louisville. The ACC has not done itself any favors this non-conference season when it comes to trying to help resumes and help NCAA tournament selection. You look at the ACC SEC challenge, it's very well documented at this point. The ACC went 2-14 against the SEC in the challenge. And not just that, they are now I'm going to make sure I get the number right here on it. But the
You're
ACC has
you're an analytics machine, Jack. I know you're going to get the number right.
I mean, I tweeted out last night, but the ACC is now 3-26 against the SEC on the season and 14-43 against power conference opponents. Those are very ugly numbers, ugly statistics. And why does that matter for Louisville? Because once you get past January 11th and you enter in the rest of the ACC slate, you have opportunities. I bet a lot of them on the road because Louisville plays 9 out of 14 games on the road during that stretch of January and February, to where you even if you rack up a bunch of wins, one, if you lose games, they're not gonna look great on the resume. But two, if you win a bunch of games, it's not gonna help you out a lot come March. To where we've had this big discussion every year about, is the ACC good? Is the ACC down? The fact of the matter is you have 57 games of tape right now, to where the ACC is largely, Duke beating Auburn last night is an exception. Clemson upsetting Kentucky, that's an exception when you look at what's happened at all the other games in the league, to where you got to be able to win some of these non-conference games to help yourself, give yourself some breathing room come March. And unfortunately for Louisville, and unfortunately for a lot of these other ACC teams, that has absolutely not happened so far this year.
Well, I would spin it where Louisville's kind of probably looking forward to their ACC slate.
Yeah.
And yeah, look, everybody wants to make the tournament, but once you get through Murderers Row and you get through what's happening here and realizing, okay, we're not going to be overmatched going into these games. Not that they're overmatched now, but going into those games and saying, okay, we can start feeling good about ourselves, and who knows what can happen in the ACC tournament. So from a standpoint of, the quad one wins and all that kind of stuff, yeah, look, get a resume builder to get into the NCAA tournament, I get that. But to have this team be successful, that's the measuring stick. What is success for them? This team wants to get better. And I understand what's happening against Ole Miss and Tennessee. But look, you knock off Indiana, you knock off West Virginia, and you're right there with Oklahoma, nip and tuck the entire way. So we know this team has the ability to do it. So yeah, finding a way to maybe sneak out some of these wins in the next few games. But I think they're looking forward to getting into ACC play and not saying, okay, the pressure's on now. It's just, hey, it's a long season. Let's go through it, because that's the mentality you have to have. The end game is always to get to the NCAA tournament. Every coach wants that. But right now, this team has to build on what they're doing and what they believe in and their philosophy, and saying, okay, you know what? The positive spin on is, hey, we can make a real run when we get to ACC play.
Yeah, and that's where Atlantis is really going to help them, because they didn't get all their work done in Atlantis, but they got a really good slice, a good start of it done. Because West Virginia, I think, is going to be a quad one win all year. That team has really exceeded expectations with, DeVries, Javon Small, those guys. I think they're going to be a quality team in the Big 12 all year. Indiana, we'll see. At worst, that'll be a quad two win, but if they can get their crap together, that they definitely have enough talent to be a quad one type win. And Oklahoma, you're not gonna lose anything losing to that Oklahoma team. But
Jack, who in the ACC right now? Like who's a juggernaut? Like, what are teams that are locks for the NCAA tournament?
Duke.
Right?
That's it. I mean, I've been impressed. I've been impressed with Pittsburgh, but Mississippi State absolutely humiliated them. North Carolina doesn't have a front court right now. But then again,
Jalen Withers.
Yeah, good friend Jalen Withers. Yeah. But outside of that, it's not a lot. So Louisville absolutely has every chance and advantage to where if they go and finish third, fourth, fifth in the ACC, you would think that should be good enough to be an NCAA tournament team. But we've seen over the past couple years where, where the ACC hasn't been as good as what it traditionally is. And even the past few years, like Pittsburgh finishing, fourth or fifth in the league last year and missing the tournament. Virginia, I think, being a top 4 team in the league last season and needing to get into the first four. And I would argue that absolutely should not have been a tournament team to where there's not a lot of value in those wins, even if you get a bunch of them, to where that's where I'm like, if you can get this a moot point for Louisville as far as making the tournament, like if they go out and let's say win in Rupp Arena, or if they beat a North Carolina, which I think they have a very real shot to beat North Carolina, because I think they match up very well with North Carolina, because Carolina's not going to be able to punish them in the front court like we just talked about. But they got to find a way to win a couple of these games to really give them some breathing room to where you can say, okay, now you go on a roll against the quote unquote softer schedule in the ACC, which aren't gimmies in terms of it's a lot of road games for
There
sure.
are.
But that's where you can really solidify yourself to say, okay, we are an NCAA tournament team. We can't leave any doubts in terms of how weak the rest of the conference is for whether we are an NCAA tournament team or not.
Look, from a coaching standpoint, yes, that's all paramount to everything that you come in here and getting to the dance. But there are also the values of just winning and getting success and feeling that and so on. This making the tournament, yeah, that every coach, Coach Kelsey, is dripping with desire to get that. But he wants to get his team where we're winning 17, 18 games, and we'll see what happens, maybe 19 in that standpoint. So I understand your perspective. And look, these games, winning, trying to find a way to get these, the Kentucky, the Duke, what's coming up, and Carolina and whatnot. But really, I think they're just focused on, okay, how can we get better and understand that we want to have this program get to the point where it needs to be. And I understand that. We talk about this and we talk about the NCAA tournament. This town is starving to get back to it. But it's a matter of, if you focus on those type of things, that we have to find a way to win these games because the NCAA tournament. Players feel that too. So it's almost like you want to get these guys to understand, hey, we've got a long road ahead of us. Let's just do our jobs and so on. Because, yeah, can they finish? We talked about this before the season started. Can they finish in the top 3 or 4? We've mentioned Wake. I've watched Wake play. I mean, it's
They're
not
nothing special this year.
No, they're not. And Clemson's good, not great. So you're talking maybe Clemson, Duke, Pittsburgh. Are those teams that are beatable? Sure. So can they climb into that top 2 or 3 where you would think, Jack, that top 2 or 3 teams are going to make it from the ACC regardless, are probably going to make the NCAA tournament? But it's numbers and it's analytics, and I get that part. But I think this staff and I think this team is focused on, okay, how can we get better so we can improve as the year goes on? And the sole focus just can't be on, we've got to beat Duke, we've got to beat North Carolina, we've got to beat Kentucky. Because if you do that, the pressure builds, and then you're not playing good basketball.
Right. That's definitely, it's a different mindset from us on the outside and them on the inside for sure, because it's all about trying to build that crescendo to March. That's where I think it would have been beneficial for Louisville if they had the Duke and Carolina games in February, for instance, just to spread it out a little bit. But that's not something you can control with the ACC for sure. The other part of it is, even if you make the NCAA tournament, with the rest of the league being where it is, that's something where they can hurt your seating a little bit as well. But that's a very down the line question and answer we can have if we get to that point. And it would be a very fun discussion to have. I'm sure a very preferable one for Louisville fans based off of what's gone on the last couple of years. Louisville will have the chance to get back on track on Sunday at Duke, which is a massive test, before facing UTEP and Kentucky to wrap up kind of the non-conference portion of the season. Coach, always appreciate the time, man. We'll be back. We'll be doing a lot previewing that Kentucky game next week for sure. as that'll be always. I know we just said it's not all in the basket to beat one team around Louisville.
That's a little different.
That one's a little different.
When I was on staff, we'd have about 4 practices a day leading up to Kentucky. So I get it.
Oh, I love it. We will get into some of those stories next week for sure. For Coach Lieberman,